Hello, peoples of the internet. Today, we have another Stairway Mountain time trial with a theme of sports cars. Admittedly, this 1975 Ford LTD, as the hubcap flies away, is not really a traditional sports car. It's got the 460 cubic inch dimension engine, and it's a very heavy vehicle. I believe it's got the same kind of basis as the Lincoln Continental of the time, and it's a huge, gigantic land barge of a car. It has 219 horsepower, which in itself isn't that bad, and you can actually get some slides out of it if you really push it. It's generally a very gentle car though, and you can floor it out of most corners without problem. Unless of course you understeer into a wall. Understeer is more of a problem with this than anything. The front suspension also feels a little firm, but it may be the nature of Stairway Mountain and the way it favours sport suspension. So, irrespective of that, it handles okay. I mean, irrespective of everything playing against it. Torque is also pretty good at 484 Newton meters. It needs torque more than it needs power, honestly. With the kind of nature of this, it's not a sports car. You'll see you can hold some pretty decent speeds through here, but it's still not because it's a sports car. You can hold the speeds because it's large, and large cars are, well, instinctively kind of more stable than small ones. Although, it will slide. As you see there, again, I had a surprisingly lucky getaway. It did a decent time around the hill, or mountain as it is. It's at an 8-minute 20.16 time, which puts it just below the drag pigeon drag and just above the Grand Marshal V8 limousine. So hey, with the kind of freewheel drag vehicle and just above a limousine, that's not too bad though, you know. In its way, it is kind of a very short version of a limousine, and I would hazard a safe guess that limousine is actually a lot narrower than this. Yeah. You'll see the suspension's very, very forgiving when you do throw it over some bumps. That's always nice to have. I mean, I'd have that over sport suspension despite impacting speed. It also beat a Ford Crown Victoria. I mean, for a car with this era, with this technology, it is impressive. And I can't complain about its time. I mean, it could use more power, but then that would make it harder to control as a wing fling the bumper. And it lands. Still, it's a very nice interior, lots of wood, a lovely soft bench seat. It's not a sports car, again, I can't emphasise that enough, but for what it is, it's a very nicely done vehicle. So, here we have a very interesting vehicle. It's a 200BX, a fairly average kind of body style of 200BX. It actually has wheels off the 90s Pessima 195s, they're not that wide. However, the engine is far more interesting, as I kind of almost throw it off the track. The engine is a 2-litre turbo diesel engine making 138 horsepower and 223 Newton meters of torque. It's enough to get the vehicle sliding, it's enough to get it into trouble if you want to, but it's a lot gentler than traditional engines. The torque is also far less than I expected for a diesel actually, but it feels far less aggressive than petrols. You can get petrols that often chuck all the torque to the road immediately and then spin the wheels up and slide it. That's why I decided having a turbo diesel would be, well, very interesting. It does feel gentler. I mean, you can slide it, but generally, if you know what you're doing, it's just challenging. I mean, other 200BXs have felt near undrivable. This one just feels challenging. And for that reason, it's a lot quicker than other 200BXs. It's set a 7-minute 57.09 time, which is quicker than other vehicles. You'll see also, fairly stable at speed, but ultimately it's not a very grippy car. It's not a large American barge, it's a small, light Japanese car, and a 200BX at that. So it loves to slide. The suspension is pretty good. It's quite sporty, but I would say slightly softer sports suspension is probably the best way to describe it. Not rock hard, but then not barge soft either. Not quite, at least. Now, the car set a time of 7 minutes 57.09, which puts it just above the Covet ZXi convertible. It's actually within a second of that, and just below the D-Series drag. So it tried, but it's a little too oversteery to achieve an even higher position on the leaderboard. It also came below the D35 Pig, but it's not a pig to drive. It was actually a lot nicer thanks to the fact that it didn't have any suspension troubles really. Not a perfect suspension system, but it's much better than certain cars down here. And I say that as the suspension lets me down and lets the car roll. I mean, you'll see, it's just a fairly basic 200BX. There's no truly special bits. Some of the bits have actually come off or come loose as I attacked the course, but fairly standard looking car. Probably because it's a fairly cheap variant just with a turbo diesel engine. And the interior is fairly standard as well. Surprisingly enough, it's actually a 4-seater. I thought the 200BX was always a 2-seater, but hey, the more you learn each day. Now here's a very interesting vehicle. This is the D15 V8 Sport. And weirdly, it's only available with an automatic transmission, which I don't understand. An automatic transmission that only allows you to use about 200 of the 246 horsepower available, disappointingly, and that's annoying. Now, the interior is also red because sports. You get sport suspension, sport wheels and sport differential, and naturally the V8 as I mentioned. It's a lot more sporty than the regular D-Series, as you will probably expect, but what you won't expect is the way this takes corners. I mean, it will step the rear out at times when you really push it, but surprisingly enough, as long as you respect that the rear end is very firm and that there's no weight in there, this vehicle can be surprisingly nice around the corners. I believe it's a combination of two things actually. The front suspension, for starters, is firmer, and that means in comparison to the rear, there's not quite the same drift car kind of disbalance. There's also the differential. It's not an open differential as with the base model, and naturally it leads me to the ABS, which is naturally helping it brake. It's not going to oversteer when you step on the brakes because the brakes will sort themselves out for you, which is always convenient. You'll see it's fairly stable here as well. This vehicle impressed me, especially since it's at a time of 747.29. I mean, that's incredible. That's kind of lower end sports car levels. 747.29 puts it just below the Pessima 80s convertible and just above the Roma Custom. And that's what I mean by impressive. I mean, it's beaten both the super sport vans I've had down here, and it's even beat a supercharged all-wheel drive Roma. And this is rear-wheel drive, remember, with a 250 horsepower V8, where the automatic won't even allow you to use all of that power. It's remarkable just how this thing tackles corners, far better than you would think what's essentially a sport package for a D-Series would allow you to. It actually drives quicker than the Miramar Rally, and that's unsuspecting of it, since it looks like a fairly regular D-Series. I think it's quite a nice truck actually. Also, it's supposedly quite quick to 60. Someone tested it and it did 6.6 seconds, so you know, trucks can be quick when you least expect them to be. Next up, we have the Brukell Caldera, Daytona Speed. And this is basically a Dodge Charger Daytona Plymouth Superbird kind of thing. It's got a roll cage. I believe it's got lots of weight stripped out of it, and the camera is slightly more to the right than I feel it should be, or the steering wheel's more to the left. One of the two things. It's just slightly odd either way. It's still a nice vehicle though, and one I'm happy to drive, other than the tyres. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a nice handling car. It also has sport suspension as well, like the D-Series. It makes it good around this track, but then the tyres just can't grip as you expect. You'll see it's stepping out, and that's all tyre. I mean, it has 360 available horsepower, before the automatic transmission shift, which is a lot, and it just doesn't have the tyres you really need to put that power down. So that does hinder it a little, and it's really quite sad because this has firmer suspension, which really suits the course better than the majority of muscle cars that have been down here, but the tyres just aren't matched up to that suspension, and it causes some problems. It feels like it's got modern components, but still the old tyres almost, because this could compete with modern cars. I'm sure of it, if only it had the tyres to compete. The time it set though was still impressive. It was a 7:34.63 time, which puts it just above the Bolide 390 Group 4, and I'm getting a big oversteering mess on at the moment. Somehow I saved that, I'm not quite sure how. And it came just below the Oldsmobile Regency Sedan Resto mod by a few seconds. This is impressive for the vehicle it is. However, it could do better. I mean, again, same with the Ford, I could emphasise that that wasn't a sports car, whereas I can really emphasise that this needs better tyres because it is a sports car, because it's got similar tyres to a Ford, I imagine, on what's needing of much better. Still, it's also below my Core 2 Supervan, so there we go. I mean, I'm sure it's a nice car, it feels like it's got a good chassis and all, but it could do so much better. And now, the Caldera has become a volcanic mess, as you would expect from a volcano collapsing in on itself from an eruption, which is exactly what this vehicle is. So, you know, that's one way of looking at it. The interior is a bit standard really for race cars. Now here we have a Subaru Impreza 22B. It's a very interesting vehicle in that it feels like other all-wheel drive cars. However, this is a road car, I believe, and you have to respect it for that. Having said that, it is still mighty quick. I mean, this has 247 horsepower, but the automatic gearing does shift far too early, and it has 346 newton meters of torque, so you'll see it's down on power over the past few vehicles other than the 200BX, and it still manages to pull itself around corners well. It's just, if this had more power it could do so much better. It really felt like the power was what was holding it back. Perhaps better gearing even could really have helped this thing, because it has a great chassis, it has great tyres, great suspension, great everything essentially to pull it round the course at such incredible speeds, yet the power just isn't matched up to that. Well, it's probably a turbo button, but then that would just end up in a huge crash, and I mean, that's not really a legitimate way of taking the hill, is it? You see, it's actually fairly stable here. I'm not sure about downforce. It felt like it may have a very, very tiny amount of positive downforce, but not enough to keep it properly stable at speed. It did seem very, very surprisingly stable. Again, I have a really surprising save there. The suspension, as I said, is brilliant. It just does its job as you want it to. It doesn't really try and shout, "I'm suspension," and make loud noises. It just does it. Now, the time it set was a 7:22.58, which puts it just below the Covet Gymkhana 670. And I mean, you'll see that was a very, very powerful vehicle, and it's managed to beat the Covet Gymkhana, so proof alone that the handling is here is that it can beat something like that with far less power. It also came below the ETK 2400i TT Sport Evolution. That's almost as long a name as the AMD Athlon 64 Black Edition, for lack of the full name in my head. Either way, I like it, and I slightly got distracted and completely messed up the angle at the end. But you'll see, it's an old mod, so the level of detail isn't the same as newer ones. Also, it's silver because, well, that's what happens to all old mods when the colours get a bit messed up. Still works though in all the important areas, which is good. Now, you'll see it's got a roll cage, kind of a racy interior. And it's slightly confused. I mean, I'm not sure if this is a race car or road car. I'm guessing it's the road. Anyway, I'm falling behind the Gavril Bandit 400X. Yep, I did the drag version of this vehicle, and it actually handled very well for a drag vehicle, so I was surprisingly eager to test the 400X, which is kind of the high-end sports version. The power isn't the same. It makes 296 horsepower, and it has 484 newton meters of torque. All in all, fairly average pony car stuff for the time being. The tyres on this though, they feel like what the Brukell Caldera needed. It's just got much better tyres for its purpose than certain other cars have. Like I did a Gavril Bandit a while ago, the Trans Am variant actually, and that felt like it was struggling for grip with a fairly similar amount of power for this. And it really does prove how tyres can really help a car get round the hill. These aren't the world's best tyres, it will still get sliding, but the tyres are easily good enough to be matched up to the rest of a car, as I somehow recover that. And it's massively helpful for the time. This beat the Subaru 22B, I mean that should be enough evidence. Also the fact that it's got rear coil springs as opposed to leaf springs, that also helps. They just seem to be a little better over the bumps ultimately than the old Leafs. Because Leaf is a very primitive suspension. Pickup trucks use it because it's good for loading weight on, but really sports cars moved on, well a lot of them did. So, the time, as I was speaking of, is 7:19.89, and it puts it between the ETK 2400i and the Subaru we just had. So remarkably, there's two cars bunched together. Who would have thought when my leaderboard's grown? And yeah, I am beating this thing up a bit, you know. It's not the very easiest vehicle to drive, but I'm like a really poor driver, so I just destroy whatever car I'm given. Hey, give me a 50 horsepower Covet and I'll probably smash it up by the end, because I just thrash every car down the hill far worse than I really should. I know, I've angered a lot of Burnside fans, probably too scared to comment, because looking by my driving style, I'm not very friendly. And here I attempt to flip the car over. I don't do a very good job of it, but I do it eventually. It's a little scarred up, some of it was done over the end jump, and fairly rugged as well, as you would expect perhaps from a muscle car. So that was always nice. The interior again, a lot of black and stuff. It's not kind of as colourful as something like the Burnside, but that's the way things were in the 60s. Now here we have a ETK 846 TT Sport Sedan, as we call it, or Saloon as I believe they'll call it in other places in the earth. Now, it's a sports car, really. I question it though, because it is remarkably fast and it's remarkably good round the corners, but I question if they've made what is ultimately a saloon car worse on the road in favour of making it better round corners, in favour of making it carry more cornering speeds. It has decent power, it's 326 horsepower and 469 newton meters of torque. It did struggle for grip, but the chassis is very good, so it's fine with that and it does get going. But the chassis is good in a racy kind of way, it's not good in a comfortable street kind of way. And the reason I have my doubts about this car is that the time it's set is a 7:14.214 time. And that puts it between an ETK KC6T convertible and a KC12ZR. And that's two K-series, you know, they're very competitive vehicles, but then when you have a saloon designed to compete with them, isn't that ETK cannibalising their own car lineup? I mean, surely you should have the road car soft and comfortable, and you should have the sports car firm and track ready. But this is just so good round corners and it handles so well, it's just not a road car anymore. I mean, I'm sure if you wanted a car that you could tackle track days at the weekend in while still using it every day, it's great. But as a car you just want to use every day, as a car you just want to use to move around in, it's not great for that. And honestly, we've seen with the super sport vans, sometimes being soft can be fun. This is an absolute weapon round corners, but it's not particularly fun. I mean, it's just a tool, it just gets the job done. And as I said, shouldn't that be the sports car's job to get the job done? Shouldn't it be the sports car's job to demolish lap times? It's still slower than the KC6T, remember? It's just trying too hard to compete with another ETK. You'll see, the outside of a car is actually quite nicely designed. It's a very modern design, but far from the worst modern designs I've seen. Wheels are also quite nice, but on one flats, which only emphasises my point. The interior is dull, drab and black. There's not much light getting into the interior compared to older cars, and I don't really like it, as you can probably tell. Again, fine on the ETK K-Series, where you need the rollover protection, but in the road car, like this Sunburst Facelift HDI, you want the visibility, and here you'll see there's still a lot of black plastic, but there is a lot more light getting into the car, and that's beautiful. That's what I like to see. Visibility is somewhat improved, and so is grip. This car actually has 235 tyres front, 255s rear, which is interesting. And they are road tyres. I mean, it looks like a race car. It's got a roll cage, sure. But this is a road car, believe me. It's got the standard engine from the Hirochi. And it's 345 horsepower, 435 newton meters of torque. So we're not just throwing a hill climb engine. It is kind of a standard road car engine. And this is very fast. But I do have wing anxiety, as I call it, when I drive this. It's just every corner you're thinking about the front lip. Like certain hill climb vehicles, it's incredibly quick around the corners. But then there's always that thought in the back of your head, or a lot of times in the front of my head. If I take this corner at slightly wrong angle, I could hit that bump, and that could tear my front aero off. That would put the whole car into disbalance. And yes, I said front aero, it's got a rear wing as well. That's not really a problem because it's so high mounted. And it's got a rear kind of splitter thing, either that or it's just visual. But it does give it a lot of grip. You'll see here, I'm taking very high speeds. In a regular Sunburst, this might throw me off the track, but because it's got some positive downforce, it was able to hold its speed quite nicely. Again, the suspension is Sunburst, it's not perfect, but it's kind of firm. You can tell this has been a soft car firmened up though. And it's got a track wheel, and this is clearly just a track weapon that's road legal, so I'm fine with it. Unlike the ETK, Hirochi doesn't have a two-seater sports car, so they've not got anything to cannibalise with this. And it's an aftermarket tuner anyway, so what would they do if they did build it? Hirochi probably couldn't stop them, and it would do more harm if they did. Here you'll see I break the front aero off, but I keep going, despite the car having iffy kind of control issues. It did set a sub 7 minute time, 6:59.79. It's 9th on the leaderboard between a Polo Tarmac and an SBR4 twin turbo stage 2 convertible. The car was a bit of a wreck. I mean, it was once a nice looking car, not anymore. This is a very quick vehicle if you know how to do it. I didn't think I could get it under 7 minutes, and honestly I choose a Polo, even if it isn't a sub 7 minute car. It's just nicer, you know, nicer to drive.